The courtroom was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every breath feel heavier than it should. A little boy stood beside his father, trying his best to look brave, even though his small hands wouldn't stop shaking. His name was Ethan Miller, only 10 years old, but in that moment, he carried himself like someone much older. Judge Frank Caprio looked down from the bench, his gentle eyes softening the instant he noticed Ethan's trembling fingers. "Good morning, young man," the judge said kindly. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. He didn't speak. The charge on the docket was simple traffic violation, but something about the situation felt wrong. The father avoided eye contact. The little boy kept glancing at him, almost like he was protecting him. And then, out of nowhere, Ethan stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with a strange courage for someone his age. "Sir, it was my fault." The courtroom froze. A few people turned their heads. Officer Linda Brooks lifted her eyes in surprise. Even David Miller, the father, looked stunned, his guilt written all over his face. Judge Caprio leaned forward, confused but calm. "You're taking responsibility for your father's ticket?" he asked gently. Ethan nodded again. "He didn't do anything wrong." "I did." That single sentence stunned everyone. Because everyone could feel it. This wasn't a child confessing. This was a child trying to shield a man standing next to him. Judge Caprio's expression softened even more. He could tell when someone was hiding pain, but when it came from a child, it hit differently. He rested his hands together, paused for a moment, and spoke in a voice slow, warm, and heavy with meaning. "Let's understand what really happened together." In that instant, the entire courtroom leaned in. No one knew the truth yet, but everyone could feel it. Something deeper was hiding behind this little boy's words, and Judge Caprio was about to uncover it. Ethan Miller stood in that courtroom like he didn't belong to the world he was born into. A 10-year-old boy shouldn't have known what fear feels like, but fear had clearly known him for a long time. His shoulders were too small for the weight they carried, his fingers too young to tremble the way they did. Beside him stood his father, David Miller, a man in his early 30s, exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. His clothes were clean, but worn. His posture was stiff, but not from pride. It came from the kind of shame a person tries to hide behind a straight back. Judge Frank Caprio looked at the two of them with patient, curious eyes, the kind that could see beyond facts, beyond charges, beyond appearances. And today, he saw something he couldn't quite define yet. "Good morning," the judge began, his voice warm. A simple greeting, but somehow it eased the air around the boy. "Who will be speaking for this matter?" David inhaled sharply, preparing to answer. But Ethan stepped forward before his father could open his mouth. "I will, sir," Ethan said quietly. The sound of a child volunteering himself for a legal matter made a few people lift their heads. Even Officer Linda Brooks blinked in surprise. Children didn't speak for their parents, especially not in a courtroom, especially not with this kind of fear and determination. Judge Caprio's eyebrows lifted just slightly. "And what's your name, young man?" "Ethan," he said. "Ethan Miller." "And you're David Miller's son?" the judge asked. "Yes, sir." "And you want to speak for this case?" Ethan nodded, but it wasn't an ordinary nod. It was a brave nod, a protective nod, the nod of someone trying to shield another person. David's jaw tightened. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, but the boy almost instinctively moved a half step away, not to reject the touch, but to keep himself standing in front of his father, almost like a shield. Judge Caprio noticed. "All right, Ethan," the judge said softly. "Why don't you tell me what happened?" Ethan gulped. His voice trembled. It was my fault." David's head snapped toward his son. "Ethan, don't." But Ethan's voice rose, desperate and scared. "No, it was me. I'm the one who caused it." The judge leaned forward slightly, hands folded. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He didn't pressure. He simply allowed the moment to settle. "So you're saying you're responsible for your father's ticket?" Judge Caprio asked. Ethan nodded again, but this time his eyes were wet. "I didn't want him to get in trouble." The judge's gaze softened. This wasn't defiance. This wasn't manipulation. This was fear and love, two emotions that rarely fit inside a child. And when they do, they leave marks. David finally spoke, his voice low and strained. Your Honor, he doesn't understand what. But Ethan cut him off, speaking louder than before. I do understand. He didn't do anything wrong. He's been working so hard, and it wasn't his fault. It was mine. His small chest rose and fell with fast breaths. He wasn't lying. He wasn't pretending. He was protecting. Judge Caprio studied him with the same kind of calm a grandfather would show a scared child in need of truth more than correction. What happened, Ethan? The judge asked gently. The boy looked at the floor, at his shoes, at the scuff on the left one. Anywhere but at his father. I opened the car door, Ethan whispered, and my dad didn't see. The car rolled a little. It wasn't supposed to move, but it did. David shut his eyes in pain. Ethan, I told you, none of this is. But Ethan was in full defense mode. I don't want him to get in trouble, sir. He already works 2 jobs. He barely sleeps. He's always tired, and he doesn't have the money for this. 2 jobs. Barely sleeps. Doesn't have money. The courtroom shifted. People looked at David differently now. Not as a man accused of a violation, but as a man crushed under life's weight. Judge Caprio's voice dropped to a softer tone. Ethan, thank you for being honest with me, but I need you to understand something. This is a courtroom, and in this room, truth isn't meant to punish. It's meant to guide. The boy's voice cracked. I'm telling the truth so you don't punish him. David's eyes filled with guilt, pain, and something deeper, something only a struggling parent knows. He whispered, Ethan, son, you shouldn't be doing this for me. But Ethan wiped his face stubbornly. I have to, Dad. You already have too much to worry about. Judge Caprio felt the words hit him harder than expected. He had seen adults lie. He had seen parents sacrifice. But seeing a child try to carry his father's burden, that was something different, something rare, something heartbreaking. He rested his hands on the bench. Young man, he said gently, tell me, do you believe this is your responsibility, or are you trying to protect your father because you love him? Ethan hesitated, his chin trembling. Then the truth slipped out, quiet and pure. I don't want anything else to go wrong for him. The judge let out a slow exhale. In that moment, the boy wasn't just protecting his father from a ticket. He was protecting him from life, from struggle, from disappointment, from the fear that grows in a child watching a parent drown silently. Judge Caprio glanced at David. The father's eyes were broken, silently pleading for understanding. This was no ordinary case. This was a story waiting to be told, a truth waiting to be uncovered, a family silently sinking with a child trying to hold them both above the water. Judge Caprio spoke with steady compassion. All right, Ethan, we're going to figure this out together. But to do that, I need the whole truth. Not the version you think will save your father. The real version. Ethan looked up for the first time. Hope flickered in his eyes, tiny, fragile, but real. And the room knew the real story was just beginning. The tension inside the courtroom shifted the moment Senator Donovan placed both palms on the defense table, leaning forward as if he were steadying himself against a storm only he could feel. A man who had spoken on national stages with absolute confidence now looked like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure which way the wind would push him. But the conflict that followed didn't explode all at once. It started small, like a hairline crack in glass, and then spread until everything he had been hiding became impossible to contain. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, observing him quietly, not with judgment, but with the kind of attention that made a person feel seen even when they didn't want to be. Senator, Caprio said gently, we can walk through this together, but I need you to be honest with me, and more importantly, with yourself. For a brief second, Donovan's political mask returned. Chin lifted, shoulders squared, the practiced smile of a man used to controlling every narrative. But then, something in his expression flickered. Something cracked. He opened his mouth, closed it again, swallowed hard, and looked down at the worn wooden table as though the grain pattern itself contained the courage he lacked. My father, he began, voice low. Then he paused, as if the memory rose like smoke, stinging his eyes from the inside. My father was a military man. Tough. Unforgiving. Nothing I did was ever enough. I learned early on that the only acceptable version of me was the strong one, the controlled one. the one who never breaks. He exhaled sharply, as though the admission itself was a betrayal. The courtroom was silent, so silent you could hear the faint buzzing of the overhead lights. Power became my shield, Donovan continued. In politics, strength is survival. And somewhere along the way, I started believing that weakness was a crime. There it was, the root, the wound he'd carried for decades. And Judge Caprio saw it. Senator, the judge said softly, strength isn't the absence of pain. Real strength is what you do with it. The words hit Donovan harder than any public scandal or political rival had ever managed. His jaw clenched, his throat tightened, his chest rose and fell quickly, too quickly, as though he was fighting off emotions that had waited years for a chance to escape. But before he could speak, the courtroom door creaked open. A young man stepped inside, tall, thin, holding his breath as though afraid to disturb the air. His hands trembled slightly, clutching a small envelope. And the moment Donovan saw him, the senator froze. Michael, he whispered. Judge Caprio looked between them, sensing a new thread pulling itself into the story. The young man, Michael Donovan, gave a timid nod. Dad, I didn't know if I should come. For the first time since the hearing began, the senator's composure didn't just slip, it collapsed. He took a step back, fear flickering across his face. You shouldn't be here, he said quickly. Too quickly. A reflex. A defense mechanism. The tone of a man who had spent his entire life locking doors inside himself. But Michael didn't move. He looked at Judge Caprio, then at his father, then down at the envelope in his hands. I heard what happened on the news, Michael said quietly, and I thought maybe this time you'd want me here. The pain in Donovan's eyes was unmistakable, and for a moment he stood perfectly still, caught between the image he had spent years building and the son he had spent years keeping at a distance. Judge Caprio leaned slightly forward, speaking with a gentle firmness. Senator Donovan, would you like your son to speak? The senator inhaled, exhaled, then nodded. Michael stepped toward the bench. His voice shook, but his resolve did not. My father always taught me to be the best, to be strong, to never show weakness. And for a long time, I thought the reason he acted like that was because he didn't care about me. I thought I wasn't enough. Donovan's head snapped up, shock, pain, and guilt locking together in his eyes. But last year, Michael continued, I found out something. Something he never told me. He was diagnosed with PTSD after witnessing a bombing overseas during a diplomatic tour. He never talked about it, never sought help. He just carried it alone. The courtroom shifted again, like oxygen had been sucked out. Judge Caprio's expression softened even further. Michael opened the envelope, pulled out a wrinkled photograph, and held it up. Dad, this is you holding me the day I was born, he said. You look terrified, but you also look proud. I kept this picture because I always hoped that someday you'd let me see that version of you again. Donovan's hands went to his face, covering his eyes. His shoulders shook, not with anger, not with frustration, but with decades of emotional weight finally collapsing under its own pressure. I pushed you away to protect you, he whispered hoarsely. I didn't want you to see me broken. But that's the problem, Dad, Michael replied, stepping closer. I never needed you to be perfect. I just needed you to be real. Judge Caprio let the moment breathe. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He simply allowed father and son to stand in the truth they had both avoided for far too long. Finally, the judge spoke. Senator, when you first walked into this courtroom, you tried to intimidate me. You tried to protect your pride. But pride doesn't heal people. Truth does. The senator lowered his hands, eyes red, voice trembling. I don't know how to fix everything, he said, but I want to try. Michael nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. That's all I ever wanted. Judge Caprio tapped his gavel lightly, not as a warning, but as a gentle reminder. Senator Donovan, he said, this courtroom isn't just a place for punishment. It's a place for turning points. And I believe you've reached yours. But the next steps, those are on you. Donovan looked at his son, then at the judge, then at himself, really at himself, for what felt like the first time in years. "I'll take them," he said quietly. One honest step at a time. A shift rippled across the room, subtle but powerful. The atmosphere grew warmer, lighter, like a window had been opened in a room that had been locked shut for decades. But the rising action wasn't finished. Because just as the senator began to steady himself, just as hope gently stitched itself into the space between father and son, Judge Caprio leaned back, fingers interlaced, eyes thoughtful. "Senator," he said slowly, "there's one more thing we need to address." And instantly, the tension returned. Not as fear, not as pride, but as a new layer of conflict. The accountability he had spent years avoiding had finally arrived. The room, once softened by the fragile reconciliation between father and son, tightened again as Judge Caprio folded his hands. His expression wasn't stern, just deeply serious, the kind of seriousness that signals a moment that will change everything. "Senator Donovan," he began, "you've shared parts of your story today, painful parts. But there is one matter left that you haven't addressed." The senator straightened, almost instinctively. Old habits, old defenses, but the look in his eyes was different now. Less guarded, more open, as if he knew resisting truth had already cost him too much. Caprio continued, voice calm but unwavering. "The incident that brought you here wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a sign that something inside you has been breaking for a long time. Before I make any ruling, I need you to be completely honest about what happened that night." Silence settled again, heavier than before. Donovan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He looked at Michael, his son, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. And then the dam broke. "I wasn't trying to intimidate anyone," the senator said quietly. "I was afraid." The word afraid sounded foreign, coming from a man who had built a career on steel and certainty. But he forced himself to continue. "That night, I received a message from a political rival, a threat. Not a physical one, but a promise to destroy everything I'd built. My reputation, my career, my legacy. And instead of dealing with it, I panicked." He paused, breath unsteady. "I drove to this courthouse thinking I could fix it, get ahead of it, prove I still had control. When the officer stopped me for speeding, I reacted the only way I knew how, by trying to assert power, by trying to be the strong man I pretended to be." Judge Caprio listened intently, his gaze steady but compassionate. "And when you entered this courtroom," Caprio said softly, "you brought that fear with you." The senator nodded, eyes brimming again. "I thought intimidation would protect me," he whispered, "but it only exposed how weak I really felt." There it was. The truth he had kept buried deeper than any political scandal. Not corruption, not arrogance. Fear. A broken, human fear of losing everything and never being enough. Caprio leaned forward. "Senator Donovan, courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about facing that fear even when it shakes you." Those words didn't just land. They rooted themselves deep inside the senator, like seeds finally finding soil after years of drifting. Michael stepped closer, placing a tentative hand on his father's shoulder. For a moment, Donovan didn't move. Then slowly, almost painfully, he covered his son's hand with his own. Judge Caprio allowed the moment, but then he spoke with gentle firmness. "Before I deliver my ruling, I need clarity. Not for the court, but for you. Senator, what do you want from this moment?" It was the question Donovan had avoided his entire life. Not, what does the public want? What does the party expect? What image must I maintain? But what do you want? Donovan inhaled shakily, eyes drifting from his son to the judge to the polished floor beneath his feet. "I want," his voice cracked. He steadied himself. "I want to stop running from myself. I want to stop hiding behind titles and status and strength that isn't real. I want to be the man my son deserves, and the man I've never allowed myself to be." Michael's breath caught. Even Judge Caprio blinked slowly, absorbing the weight of those words. And then, something subtle shifted in the senator's posture. For the first time in the entire hearing, he wasn't standing like a politician. He wasn't standing like a soldier. He wasn't standing like a man defending his image. He was simply standing as a father, as a human being, as someone choosing truth over pride. That was the moment, the quiet, powerful, irreversible moment, when everything changed. Judge Caprio's expression softened with deep, almost fatherly understanding. "Senator," he said gently, "you've carried a burden alone for far too long. Today you laid it down." Donovan exhaled, long and trembling, as though releasing years of invisible weight. And that breath, that single, vulnerable, honest breath, marked the true turning point. Not the exposure on live TV, not the confrontation with his son, not the fear or the pride or the courtroom drama, but the choice to stop being the man the world demanded and start becoming the man he was meant to be. Judge Caprio lifted his gavel slightly, not to strike, not yet, but as a symbol. "Now," he said, voice steady, "we begin the path forward, a path no longer ruled by fear, but by truth." The courtroom seemed to breathe with the senator as he slowly lifted his head. For the first time since the hearing began, he wasn't shrinking beneath guilt or standing behind pride. He stood steady, grounded, real. Judge Frank Caprio rested his hands on the bench, considering the man before him with a calm, almost fatherly seriousness. "Senator Donovan," he said gently, "the law requires accountability, but accountability doesn't exist to destroy people. It exists to guide them back to themselves." The senator nodded, his voice faint but steady. "I understand, Your Honor." Caprio continued, his tone warm yet firm. "You misused your influence. You acted from fear, not wisdom, and your actions had consequences for the people around you. But today, you've shown something far more meaningful than control or power." A soft silence followed. "You showed honesty," Caprio added, "and courage, and a willingness to grow. That matters more to this court than any title attached to your name." Donovan blinked rapidly, emotion tightening his throat. This wasn't leniency. It was something deeper, recognition. Judge Caprio turned slightly toward Michael. "And you," he said kindly, "are a reminder of why truth must always lead. You didn't push your father to break. You helped him find the strength to be honest." Michael lowered his gaze, trying to hide the tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. Then Caprio delivered his ruling with that signature balance of justice and humanity. "For the violation and the actions that followed, I am issuing a fine and requiring community outreach sessions focused on youth mentorship, not as punishment, but as purpose." The senator exhaled, relieved, not because the outcome was light, but because it made sense. Purpose, service, a chance to give back in a way that aligned with the man he wanted to become. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. "Senator," he said softly, "you're used to being the one people look to for strength. But today, your son was the one who gave strength to you. Don't forget that." Donovan looked at Michael with a trembling smile. "I won't," he whispered. "I promise." The judge leaned forward slightly, offering his signature closing gesture, a gentle nod that felt like a hand on the shoulder. "Go rebuild your relationship. Rebuild yourself. And remember, real strength isn't loud. It's honest." The senator pressed his lips together, absorbing every word. Michael stepped closer, and without hesitation this time, Donovan wrapped an arm around his son, drawing him into a tight embrace. No cameras, no speeches, no political spotlight, just a father and his son finally seeing each other clearly. As they turned to leave the courtroom, something in the senator's posture had changed. He walked not like a powerful public figure, but like a man who had finally stepped out from behind his own shadow. Judge Caprio watched them go, a quiet, satisfied calm settling across his face. Justice had been served, not by breaking a man, but by helping him rise. The courtroom doors closed behind Senator Donovan and his son, but the impact of their moment lingered like a warm echo across the room. Judge Frank Caprio quietly gathered his papers, the faintest hint of a smile touching his face, the kind that appears when justice isn't just served, but understood. Stories like this didn't happen every day. A powerful man humbled, a son standing tall, and a judge reminding the world that compassion has a strength all its own. In the end, the senator didn't walk away defeated. He walked away transformed. And maybe that's the real purpose of justice. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe, even for a moment, that kindness can change a life, then don't forget to support the channel. Subscribe for more real stories of courage, humanity, and the extraordinary heart of Judge Frank Caprio. Your support helps us share moments that the world needs to hear, moments that remind us that empathy still exists, that honesty still matters, and that one compassionate voice can make all the difference. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay hopeful, stay kind, and keep believing in the power of humanity.